Let's face it, when we think about romance, we picture candlelit dinners, awkward first kisses, and maybe the occasional cringeworthy pickup line. But what if we told you that our modern love lives, Tinder ghosting and all, are nothing compared to the sheer weirdness, formality, and public pressure of ancient courtships? Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Why ancient courtships were unbearably awkward, but also to remind you that romance has always been weird. In fact, in many cases, it was even more unbearable than that disastrous high school crush you'd rather forget. This book will take you on a slow, amusing, and educational tour through the most awkward historical love rituals from around the world. Courtship throughout history wasn't usually about love. It was a transaction, a family alliance, a political power move, or a way to boost livestock counts. And yet, across every culture and time period, humans found ways to make the process even more complicated, sometimes absurd, and almost always terribly awkward. Imagine trying to woo someone by hurling a bloodied spear into their family's livestock pen to show bravery, as in some Viking traditions, or spending years writing poetry to a woman you've never even seen, all while your family negotiates her weight in gold. Ancient Greek suitors offered love tokens that included dried goat meat and obscure references to tragic myths. Mesopotamian lovers wrote sweet nothings on clay tablets that could shatter if dropped. Courtship wasn't a private offer, it was a community event, often with everyone from the village elder to the town goat having a say in your future relationship. And it wasn't just the suitors who suffered. Women were often reduced to bargaining chips, beauty trophies, or the quiet pawns in power games. Yet some managed to push the envelope in subtle, brilliant ways, writing secret poetry, sending hidden signals through embroidery, or outright defying societal norms. This book will share their stories too. But don't expect dramatic love stories here. This isn't a steamy historical romance. It's a slow burn, lightly humorous, and occasionally snoozeworthy parade of formality, misunderstanding, and social anxiety dressed up in silks and sandals. You'll learn about Byzantine beauty contests disguised as religious ceremonies. You'll see how ancient Indian swayamvaras were essentially romantic game shows. And you'll follow awkward love letters dictated to scribes who had no idea what flirting even meant. This is ideal bedtime reading, not because the stories are dull, but because they are oddly calming. There's something comforting in knowing that people have always struggled with love, that weird courtship rituals aren't new, and that no matter how bad your date went, it probably wasn't worse than having to serenade someone while dancing in a mask made of bear fur. So, fluff your pillow, turn down the lights, and prepare to doze off to the rhythmic awkwardness of ancient love. History may be boring, but in the best possible way. When we think of ancient Egypt, our minds often drift to towering pyramids, golden tombs, and pharaohs with eyeliner sharper than modern-day influencers. But beneath the monumental architecture and mysterious gods was a civilization with very real, very human problems, including how to ask someone out without dying of embarrassment. Ancient Egyptian courtship was both poetic and painfully structured. It reflected not only the culture's spiritual beliefs, but also its rigid social hierarchy. And, as we'll see, awkwardness was baked right into the papyrus, love, and the afterlife, more than just forever in Egyptian culture. Love wasn't just about this life, it extended into the afterlife. that meant marriage and romantic unions were spiritually significant. A suitor wasn't just looking for a wife or husband for a few decades. They were searching for someone who'd be buried with them, accompany them through the trials of Duat, the underworld, and share the eternal picnic that was paradise. Sounds romantic, right? But here's the twist. To achieve this heavenly companionship, one had to endure an earthly ordeal of formal introductions, family agreements, and a proposal system that made even the boldest suitor feel like a flustered frog before the Nile's mighty hippopotamus of tradition. Love songs and poetic pickup lines. One of the gentler aspects of Egyptian courtship was poetry. Egyptians adored love songs. These weren't just scribbles passed in class. They were inscribed on papyri, painted on walls, and sung during festivals. Many of them have survived, offering a vivid glimpse into the romantic thoughts of a civilization over 3,000 years old. Here's a real excerpt from a love poem found in the Chester Beatty Papyrus. She has no rival. There is no one like her. She is more beautiful than any other girl. She is like the star goddess rising at the beginning of a good year. ... double quotes. Sweet, yes, but also heavy with cosmic expectations. Imagine trying to flirt with someone today by comparing them to the rising of a divine celestial being. On one hand, it's flattering. On the other, it's the kind of pressure that might send someone running for the pyramids. In ancient Egypt, poetry served as both a romantic expression and a social formality. You didn't just tell someone you liked, often through intermediaries, because direct confrontation between unmarried men and women could be taboo, depending on the era and social class. Family first. The negotiation of marriage. Like many ancient societies, the romantic process in Egypt was rarely a private affair. Families, particularly the patriarchs, held immense power in arranging matches. This wasn't just about love, it was economics, status, and spiritual compatibility. A potential suitor, once interested, would approach the woman's family with offerings. These gifts weren't bribes. Technically, they were gestures of goodwill and stability. Think of it as a primitive credit score. Can this person support a household? Does their family have a good reputation? Are their crops healthy? Do they own land? Imagine being rejected because your granaries weren't full enough. The marriage contract, where love meets legalist. The families approved. The next step was drafting a marriage contract. Egyptians were surprisingly bureaucratic about love. These contracts outlined not just dowries, but what each party could expect if the union went sour. Even ancient people planned for breakups, a common clause. The wife retained her personal property, and if the husband abandoned her or took another wife without consent, she could keep the children and get compensation. It was progressive and deeply unromantic. In some cases, marriage contracts included absurdly specific details, like the number of linen garments to be gifted, or how many jars of beer were to be shared during holidays. Because, of course, nothing says, "I love you" like 30 jars of wheat ale. Courtship rituals, offerings, gifts, and the staring game. What did actual dating look like? Let's be clear, the concept of dating as we know it didn't exist. Unmarried men and women did interact, particularly in lower classes and farming communities, but it was always within socially accepted boundaries. Couples often met during harvest festivals, religious gatherings, or through family alliances. In wealthier households, interactions were more guarded. A man might send gifts, lotus, flowers, perfumes, or jewelry as a form of courtship. If accepted, the gesture could be followed by further negotiations. If rejected, the suitor backed off to preserve family honor. Some sources suggest that glances and body language played an important role. Staring across the fields or over the temple steps wasn't just dramatic, it was strategic. A well-placed look could initiate a cascade of poetry, offerings, and family drama. Women's role in courtship. Subtle power women in ancient Egypt had more legal rights than their counterparts in Greece or Rome. They could own property, initiate divorce, and participate in legal contracts. In courtship, their role was more active than in many other ancient societies, though still shaped by family interests. While women couldn't always choose freely, their opinions were taken into account, especially in the middle and upper classes. A clever woman could manipulate the social system, subtly sending back a gift to signal rejection, responding to poetry with metaphorical rebuffs, or even leveraging religious positions to gain independence. Some women became priestesses, traders, or landowners, bypassing marriage altogether. Others used temple festivals, where religious ecstasy blurred social lines, as rare windows for romantic flirtation. The tragic and the absurd. Not all love stories were divine, of course. Not every courtship went smoothly. Take the case of a miner, official named Nebemekit, whose love for a local brewer's daughter is recorded in a tomb inscription. He offered her father 2 cows and a plot of barley land, but the brewer demanded a 3rd cow and a new bronze sickle. Nebemekit refused, citing unfair terms. The girl, caught between family loyalty and her own heart, ended up marrying a potter from Thebes. Nebemekit's final entry reads, "She will not pass with me through the hall of Manat. I drink alone." Then there is the mysterious case of an aristocrat who reportedly faked his death to test the loyalty of his lover. When she wept, he revealed himself and asked for her hand in marriage. She declined. No one likes a drama king. The afterlife of love, perhaps. The most endearing aspect of Egyptian courtship was its spiritual dimension. Lovers often prayed together, made offerings to Hathor, goddess of love, and wrote tomb inscriptions expressing eternal devotion. One such inscription reads, "May we rise together in the fields of reeds. May your voice greet me in the golden sunlight. May we never be reborn apart." To modern eyes, it's beautiful. To ancient Egyptians, it was essential. The idea that you could be bound to someone for eternity added weight and a good deal of pressure to every romantic decision. Ancient Egyptian courtship was a masterclass in contradictions, poetic yet bureaucratic, romantic yet heavily negotiated, empowering yet deeply patriarchal. It required subtlety, patience, and often divine intervention to succeed. And while it may seem unbearably awkward from our perspective, it was a reflection of a society that took Levant its consequences very seriously. So, next time your text gets left on read, remember, at least you didn't have to bribe a brewer with cows or woo someone through clay tablets and legal contracts. Now, close your eyes and imagine lotus flowers drifting down the Nile. As a young poet recites lines to a girl whose father is more interested in sickles than sonnets. Boring. History perhaps but strangely soothing enchanting Greece, the land of philosophers, democracy, and extremely complicated love lives. It's where Socrates pondered virtue, where Olympians meddled in mortal romances, and where the phrase awkward courtship was practically an Olympic event. If you've ever experienced a misread signal, a one-sided crush, or a poorly timed love confession, be comforted. The Greeks went through all of that, and worse. Courtship in ancient Greece was a swirling cocktail of divine confusion, arranged marriages, ritual gift-giving, and goat-related awkwardness. Yes, goats. You'll see. In this chapter, we'll stroll through the marble columns of antiquity and peek behind the philosophical curtain to examine how love was pursued, proposed, and sometimes painfully performed by the toga-clad romantics of the ancient world. Love, or property agreement. In classical Athens and many Greek city-states, marriage wasn't about two people falling head over sandals for each other. It was about ensuring the family's legacy, passing down citizenship, and producing legitimate heirs. The woman didn't even need to be present for the marriage arrangement, just her male guardian, Kyrios, usually her father or brother, was needed to shake hands with the groom and seal the deal. Romantic. No. Efficient. Absolutely. Still, this didn't mean that love was absent in Greek society, was just mostly relegated to poetry, mythology, and extramarital affairs. Courtship was often a shadow negotiation happening in glances, public festivals, and rare whispered conversations. The role of Eros, blame it on the gods, one of the reasons Greek love was so confusing was the chaotic pantheon of gods responsible for it. Chief among them was Eros, the mischievous god of desire, later renamed Cupid by the Romans, who shot arrows that made people fall helplessly in love, often with the worst possible person. Then there was Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and seduction, who inspired passion but also revenge. It was widely accepted that falling in love was less a personal choice and more a divine prank played by these unpredictable deities. The Greeks believed love could be dangerous, something to fear, not always cherish. The word eros itself denoted a kind of obsessive, destabilizing desire. Falling in love wasn't a gentle walk through a vineyard. It was often described like madness, possession, or even disease. Courtship gifts, goats, cheese, and olive oil before roses and chocolates. Ancient Greek suitors had their own ways of showing interest. These gifts weren't just tokens of affection, they were part of serious negotiations, meant to impress the girl's family more than the girl herself. Common courtship gifts included goats, a symbol of prosperity and milk, cheese wheels. Offering dairy was a sign of hospitality and wealth. Jugs of olive oil, valuable and practical. Cloaks or jewelry, reserved for wealthier men. Poetry and song, particularly popular in symposiums, male-only drinking parties. A well-known comic poet once joked that a man couldn't win a woman's heart without a herd of goats, or at least a very fine cheese. He wasn't wrong. The idea was simple: show you could provide. Courtship was as much about demonstrating your household's productivity as it was about charm. The invisible woman. Girls behind walls. Greek girls, especially from elite families, led extremely sheltered lives. They were typically married off by the time they were 14 to 16 years old, often two men much older, sometimes even double their age. Before marriage, Most girls were kept at home, behind walls, out of public view. This created a courtship conundrum. How do you court someone you can't see? The answer: festivals. During religious festivals like Arctea, dedicated to Artemis or Panathenea, young women could appear in public, often in ceremonial processions. These were rare glimpses where suitors could admire potential brides discreetly and respectfully. If a man liked what he saw, he wouldn't approach the girl directly. He'd approach her father, like a nervous intern trying to schedule a meeting with the CEO. If all went well, the marriage would be arranged, perhaps after some negotiations involving land, livestock, or political alliances. Men courting men, the pederastic puzzling addition to traditional marriage practices. Ancient Greece had a culturally accepted tradition of pederastal relationships between older men and younger boys, particularly in aristocratic circles. While disturbing to modern sensibilities, this practice was framed at the time as mentorship mixed with emotional and often romantic bonding. Courting involved gifts, mentorship, and formalized roles. It wasn't necessarily always physical, but it was emotional, idealized, and filled with strict social rules. These relationships coexisted with heterosexual marriage and added another layer of complexity to the Greek understanding of love and courtship. Importantly, love between adult men was also present, celebrated in poetry and myth-like. The tragic romance between Achilles and Patroclus, or the passionate bond of Harmodius and Aristogiton, who were considered heroes in Athens. Love. In mythology, weird, wild, and worrisome Greek myths are filled with love stories, but few of them are healthy. Take Apollo and Daphne. Apollo falls in love, thanks to Eros, and chases Daphne through the woods. Daphne, terrified, begs her father, a river god, to save her, so he turns her into a tree. Apollo then caresses the tree and vows eternal devotion. Awkward. Or Zeus, who seduced mortals by transforming into animals: a bull, a swan, even a golden shower. Yes, really. The result: demigods, angry goddesses, and epic tragedy. The myths were cautionary tales as much as entertainment. They told listeners, love is dangerous, love is divine, and love will probably get you turned into a tree. Spartan simplicity, love through abduction in Sparta. Courtship had its own brand of awkward. A Spartan man didn't write poems or present goats. Instead, once a match was arranged, he would steal his bride from her family in what was essentially a mock kidnapping. She would then have her head shaved and wear men's clothes before their first night together. Because Spartans prized simplicity, discipline, and strength, elaborate courtship rituals were frowned upon. Emotional expression was seen as a weakness. Love was utilitarian, a way to produce strong children for the state. Dating life feels cold and transactional. Just remember, at least you weren't pretending to kidnap your wife while she wore your old tunic. Romance after marriage, a different kind of love. Interestingly, while many Greek marriages began as arrangements, love could still grow. Husbands and wives often developed deep bonds over time. Inscriptions on tombs and grave stelae sometimes show real affection. One Athenian gravestone reads, "Greater than to my wife, who spoke little, did much, and whose absence leaves my hearth cold." It's not poetry, but it's genuine. That said, men often expressed romantic longing more freely in poetry about courtesans, hetairai, or lovers outside of marriage. These relationships were not bound by the same strict expectations and could be more emotionally open. Lessons from the Greeks. Awkward, but honest. What can we learn from ancient Greek courtship? Love was formal, not spontaneous. It followed social scripts more than feelings. Romance lived in poetry more than practice. What was written didn't always match real life. Marriage was a civic duty. Emotions came second to alliances. Everyone played a role. From the gods to the goat herder, love was a community affair. Ancient Greek romance was a complicated, contradictory dance between tradition, passion, and social expectation. While it might sound cold by modern standards, it reflected a world where survival, citizenship, and social standing were the cornerstones of life, and love had to squeeze in around the edges. Still, somewhere between the goat gifts, head shavings, and divine curses, real feelings did emerge. And maybe that's the greatest takeaway. Even in societies shaped by myth and machinery, love finds a way, even if it's awkward, especially when it's awkward. So as you drift into sleep, imagine the marble columns of Athens, bathed in golden sunlight. A bashful suitor approaches a stern father, nervously clutching a goat. Somewhere nearby, a bard recites a love poem to a crowd that only half listens. Aphrodite smiles knowingly, and the awkward dance of love continues. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, unless it's courtship, in which case proceed with caution. The Romans, with all their togas, aqueducts, and dramatic flair, had an approach to love and marriage that was structured, performative, and, like much of their empire, highly political. If Greek romance was poetic and philosophical, Roman romance was contractual and public. Every whisper of affection came with an audience. Every marriage was a civic performance. Even love affairs had rules, regulations, and repercussions. And yet, behind the marble temples and legal documents, there were hearts at work, cautiously, sometimes desperately trying to love within the lines of law and legacy. 1. Marriage as empire building. Literally, for the Romans, marriage wasn't simply a personal decision, it was a national investment. Love was something that might be tolerated but never prioritized. The ideal Roman citizen was pragmatic, dutiful, and focused on the future of Rome above all else. Marriages, especially among the elite, were arranged to consolidate wealth, political alliances, and family honor. Your choice of spouse could determine your career in the Senate, your inheritance, or your social survival. And in case that wasn't stressful enough, much of the process happened under the watchful eyes of your neighbors, extended family, and temple priests. Forget the quiet dinner proposal. In ancient Rome, courtship looked more like a job interview, with your entire lineage listed on a scroll. -2. The role of the paterfamilias. Dad knows best that the heart of Roman family life was the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. He wielded ultimate power over all family members, including decisions about marriage. If he said no, that was it. If he said yes, the bride and groom had better prepare the garlands. Women, even adult women, had little legal autonomy. A daughter required her father's permission to marry. Once married, she might fall under her husband's control or remain legally tied to her father if a more modern arrangement, sine manu, was agreed upon. This meant courtship wasn't about emotional compatibility. It was about gaining approval from a man who likely had a statue of Jupiter in his atrium and a family crest that went back 6 generations, -3. Engagements, the formal pre-contract Romans didn't jump straight into marriage. They had sponsalian engagement ceremony that was nearly as serious as the wedding itself. This wasn't just a casual promise to eventually tie the knot. It was a legal, binding commitment that involved witnesses, symbolic gestures, and yes, financial deposits. The future groom would present his sponsalia giftaphon, a ring, usually, worn on the left hand's third finger, where it was believed a vein led directly to the heart, along with other small tokens. Contracts were often signed, names were inscribed, and everyone went home knowing that the match was now a matter of public record, and if either party backed out, there were financial penalties. Heartbreak and detta, Roman classic, -4. Courtship. In the streets, no privacy, no pressure room, was a bustling, crowded city. Homes were built close together, and extended families lived under one roof. This meant that any romantic exchange was highly public. Courting someone often took place on balconies, in marketplaces, or during public festivals where half the city might be watching. Young women walked with chaperones. Young men rarely approached directly. Instead, they might write poetry, send messages through slaves, or perform small acts of admiration from a distance. Picture a nervous young Roman standing in the forum, dramatically reciting love verses, while his beloved drops a handkerchief from the balcony and her mother squints suspiciously from behind the curtain. Absolutely. Romantic expression was everywhere in Roman poetry, especially among the likes of Ovid, Catullus, and Propertius. These poets immortalized their crushes, flings, and frustrations in lines that ranged from heartbreakingly sincere to hilariously petty. Catullus famously wrote, "Greater than I hate and I love. Why do I do this? Perhaps you ask. I do not know, but I feel it, and I am tortured," completely at odds with how marriage actually worked. Many of these poetic relationships were outside the formal bounds of matrimony. Mistresses, amicae, courtesans, or even married women became the muses of Rome's literary elite. True affection, it seems, had to sneak in through the side door. -6. Dowries. The cost of love. One of the most essential and awkward parts of Roman courtship was the das, or dowry. The bride's family was expected to provide a sum of money, property, or assets to help support the new household. This wasn't just tradition, it was law. Dowries were carefully negotiated and documented. The size of the dowry reflected the status of the bride's family, and if a marriage ended in divorce, the dowry, or part of it, might be returned. Legal battles over dowry repayments were common, and sometimes vicious. A father might spend more time haggling over his daughter's dowry than she ever got to spend with her husband. A suitor might be chosen based on his willingness to forego a portion of itor, demand more. Love was nice. Dowry clauses were nicer. -7. Weddings, public, ritualistic, and loaded with symbolism. Roman wedding nuptia was a public spectacle. It began with auspicious dates. One got married in May because it was believed to bring bad luck. The best days were chosen based on astrology and religious calendars. The bride wore a white tunica recta, tied with a woolen belt called the cingulum, which the groom would untie later, symbolizing, well, you can guess. She also wore a flame-colored veil and yellow shoes. a mix of modesty and ritual symbolism. The ceremony often included a sacrifice to the gods, the joining of hands, dexterum Yunxia, in front of guests, the pronouncement ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia, where you are Gaius, I am Gaia, a traditional pledge of identity and unity. Afterward, the bride was carried to her new home, escorted by torchlight and serenaded by musicians, and guests chanting fertility songs, some of them very explicit. -8. Love after marriage, sometimes found, often forgotten. Many Roman marriages, especially among the elite, were political partnerships, but that didn't mean affection was impossible. Some tomb inscriptions revealed genuine emotional bonds. One famous epitaph reads, "Greater than she lived with me for 40 years, without a single quarrel. May the earth lie light upon you." Others, not so much still. There were cases where mutual respect and love developed over time, especially in lower-class homes, where marriages were less about politics and more about shared survival. Bonds could grow organically, but in many elite cases, emotional needs were met outside the marriage. Affairs, flings, and intense poetic relationships allowed people to explore love in ways the strict rules of marriage didn't permit. -9. Divorce, easy to get, hard to avoid. Scandalon. Like many ancient cultures, divorce in Rome was legal and relatively easy for men, especially. All it took was a statement of intent. A husband could dismiss his wife with a simple declaration, and she returned to her father's house. However, if she brought a large dowry, her family could demand repayment or initiate public disputes that tarnished reputations. Women could also initiate divorce, especially in the later Republic and Empire periods, though social judgment often followed. A divorced woman risked being labeled a troublemaker, regardless of fault. Some Romans married multiple times, often for alliance purposes, making serial marriage an elite tradition long before it became Hollywood cliché. Sheer, the Roman legacy, law, love, and lingering traditions. Many modern marriage customs trace their roots to Roman practices: engagement rings, formal ceremonies, public vows, legal dowries. Even the idea of love constrained by societal structures has its roots in this civilization. The Romans viewed love as something private, even suspicious, while marriage was a tool for public order. True romance had to be disguised in verse or lived in quiet defiance of expectations. Roman courtship was a theatrical paradox, public yet repressed, legal yet emotionally evasive, grand yet painfully awkward. For every poetic line written on a scroll, there were dowry arguments at the dinner table. For every white-veiled bride, a bored senator calculating land inheritance. But in the cracks of formality, real emotion still crept in. People found ways to love, to dream, and to express themselves within the limits of law, family, and the shadow of the empire. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine a Roman street bathed in lamplight. A nervous poet clutches a ring. A girl's veil flutters in the wind. Somewhere nearby, a father counts goats and considers contracts. Love in Rome was never simple, but always unforgettable. Before there were apps, phones, or even paper, there were clay tablets, and in the land between the rivers, the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, love was baked into bricks, impressed with cuneiform, and buried beneath centuries of dust and awkward intentions. Mesopotamia, stretching through what is now Iraq and parts of Syria, Kuwait, and Turkey, birthed some of the world's earliest writing systems, laws, and cities. But along with records of grain inventories and tax disputes, archaeologists have uncovered something far more charming: ancient love letters, marriage contracts, and poetic pleas from hearts long turned to dust. In this chapter, we dig into the muddy details of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian courtship where love came wrapped in religious symbolism, heavily negotiated dowries, and long-distance longing etched in stone. I know the first love letters. Straight from the oven, the oldest known love letter in human history comes from the Sumerian city of Ur. Around 2000 BCE, it was written by a priestess named Enheduanapap, the world's first named authorand. It wasn't just about passion. Her writings mixed spiritual longing with erotic metaphors, directed at the god Inanna, the goddess of love and war. But it wasn't just divine love that found its way onto clay. Some very human love letters have been discovered, pressed carefully, with styluses onto moist slabs, then baked for preservation and possibly posterity. Here's a translated line from a Babylonian tablet. "Greater than to my Lord, may your heart rejoice. May the gods bless you with health. I long for your touch, like the dry earth longs for water." It's heartfelt, it's poetic, and it was sent via a clay tablet delivered by a slave courier walking dusty streets. Talk about commitment. -2. Courtship. Via courier, slow and formal in Mesopotamia. Courtship was slow partly by tradition, partly by necessity. Cities were often spaced out, roads dangerous, and communication deeply ceremonial. A suitor might write a formal letter, send it through a servant or trusted family member, and wait, sometimes for weeks. The response, if it came, would be just as carefully composed. The messages were formulaic and respectful, almost legal in tone. Courtship was rarely casual. Whether from noble families or respected merchants, marriage negotiations followed a strict script. Introduce yourself, praise the family, list your qualifications, propose an alliance. Maybe toss in a poetic line or two about longing. If you were feeling bold. -3. Gods in the bedroom. Love, sex, and spirituality in Mesopotamian culture. Love and sex weren't just human matters, they were deeply tied to the divine. The goddess, Inanna Ishtar, in Akkadian myth, ruled over love, fertility, sex, and war. Her myths were powerful, graphic, and often central to love rituals. One of the most famous ceremonies in ancient Sumer was the sacred marriage rite Hieros Gamot. In this ritual, the king symbolically married the goddess, Inanna represented by a high priestessin, a yearly ceremony meant to ensure fertility for the land. The rite involved actual sexual union in the temple, celebrated with poetry and public processions. Here's a line from a temple hymn: "Greater than bridegroom, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, honey sweet, you have captivated me. Let me stand trembling before you." It was spiritual and sensual, blurring the lines between ritual devotion and romantic love. For Mesopotamians, the act of love was an echo of divine force, something to be honored, but also carefully managed. -4. The marriage market. Contracts and bride prices. As with most ancient civilizations, marriage was less about emotions and more about economics and family status. In Mesopotamia, the marriage process was contractual. Marriage contracts were written on clay and stored in archives or family homes. These contracts detailed the bride price to be paid to the woman's family, the dowry to be provided by the bride's family, inheritance, rights, and future financial arrangements, clauses in case of divorce or infertility. What would happen if either party died? If the bride was from a noble family, the contract might include stipulations about land ownership or political ties. If from a merchant family, it might detail grain, silver, or livestock to be exchanged. But here's the kicker: some contracts even spelled out the number of slaves and jars of oil a wife could expect if her husband took another wife or concubine. That's how awkward and specific things got. -5, arranged, ... but not always loveless, though most marriages were arranged by families. Mesopotamian society did acknowledge the existence of love and, even in rare cases, love matches. In one famous court case recorded on a tablet, a young woman defied her father's chosen suitor and eloped with a man she loved. Her father demanded legal action. The court, however, sided with the daughter, citing temple precedent that if the woman was of age and freely chose, the marriage could stand. This case was rare, but it shows that while tradition ruled, personal choice wasn't always ignored. Once married, many couples developed affection and partnership. Letters between traveling husbands and wives reveal concern, longing, and even jealousy. One husband wrote from a trade mission, "Greater than may you keep our household strong, scold the boy for not studying. I send you figs and hope you sleep well." It's not Shakespeare, but it's something real. -6. The gifts of courtship. From beer to bronze, a Mesopotamian suitor had to show that he could provide in that started with courtship gifts. These were often beer, very important, wool or fine cloth, silver rings or bangles, bronze tools, offerings for the temple, to show piety sometimes. A suitor would also commission a small statue or carving something like a symbolic promise. If he was very wealthy, he might even pay for repairs to the girl's home or provide animals for her family's land. All of this said one thing: I am useful. Please consider me. And as you might guess, the woman's opinion was rarely the deciding factor. -7. Parental influence and the role of women. Women in Mesopotamia had fewer rights than Egyptian or later Roman women, but they weren't powerless. Some owned property, ran businesses, and even served as scribes or priestesses. In rare cases, a woman could initiate a divorce or reject a suitor, though it usually came with social consequences. Parents arranged matches based on social class, reputation, and economic potential. Fathers negotiated contracts. Mothers trained daughters in the domestic arts, but also offered advice on how to maintain their place in the household and survive the expectations of their new homes. Marriages were about joining families, not just individuals. A successful courtship was less about love and more about economic and spiritual alignment. -8. Divorce, loss, and the longevity of love. Divorce was legal but complicated. A man could dismiss his wife if she was infertile but had to return part of the dowry. A woman could demand separation if she was neglected, though she might lose her property. Still, many Mesopotamian texts express enduring bonds, especially in cases where death separated couples. Tomb inscriptions ask the gods to reunite spouses in the afterlife. Songs recorded for temple ceremonies recall lost lovers and call for remembrance through prayer. Even in a world of clay and contracts, love awkward, often unspoken left its trace. -9. The poetry of longing. Clay tablet. Romance, one of the most compelling windows into Mesopotamian romance is its poetry. Temple hymns and love songs abound, and while some were religious, many were deeply personal. A fragment reads, "Your glance is the light of dawn, your voice, the murmur of water. I am clay, and you are the hand that shapes me." This isn't just ritual, it's raw feeling. Someone, somewhere, sat in a dim room and wrote this by oil lamp. They pressed it onto wet earth, hoping their words might reach another's heart even through dust and centuries. Mesopotamian courtship was slow, symbolic, and filled with the weight of tradition. It was awkward by modern standards, full of negotiations, intermediaries, and bureaucratic love letters made of stone. And yet, among the tax records and temple lists, the love still hums. So, tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine a desert city under the stars. A nervous young man scratches cymbals into a damp clay slab. Somewhere across town, a girl waits near a flickering lamp, listening for the footsteps of a courier bearing something heavy and delicate, a message of love from a distant heart, baked with care, shaped like hope. When you think of Vikings, you might picture horned helmets, which, by the way, they didn't actually wear, roaring longships, and grizzled warriors swinging axes. But behind all that rough exterior was a surprisingly formal, often awkward, and occasionally poetic courtship tradition, one where emotions simmered beneath layers of honor, dowry negotiations, and complicated family alliances. Vikings, after all, weren't just raiders and explorers. They were farmers, traders, poets, and dreamers too. Their approach to love and marriage reveals a deeply practical society with rules as firm as their iron swords. Beneath every beard was a man required to prove himself, not just in battle, but in the intricate social dance of securing a bride. Let's step into a world where the line between a marriage proposal and a challenge to a duel was sometimes blurry. -1. Love, a culture of contraction. Viking societies spanning roughly from the late 700s to the early 1100s AD across Scandinavia. Marriage was a civil agreement, not a religious ceremony. Love was optional. Honor, land, and alliances non-negotiable. Courting someone didn't start with a secret letter or a glance at a feast. It started with a formal proposal of intent, usually delivered to the girl's family, often her father or male guardian. If the young woman was of marriageable age, typically 12 to 15, her opinion was considered but not always decisive. If accepted, the union was confirmed with a bride price, not a dowry in the traditional sense, but a payment from the groom's family to the bride's, symbolizing that she was of value and that the groom could support her and the negotiations. Oh, they were tense. One Norse saga describes a suitor nervously approaching a chieftain to ask for his daughter's hand. The chieftain asked how many sheep the suitor had, how much land he owned, and if his shield had ever cracked in battle. The answer to the last question was only once. The marriage went forward with a sizable bride price and a warning never to crack it again. -2. The bride price, a blood-soaked bargain unlike many other ancient cultures. The Vikings saw the bride price munder not as a purchase, but as proof of good standing. It was usually a set of valuable silver, coins, livestock, weapons, even property, and sometimes a refusal of an offer could result in a feud. In one grim tale from the Laxdilla saga, a man named Jartan proposed to Gudrun with a fair bride price. Her father found it insufficient. Jartan, humiliated, insulted the family. The marriage didn't happen. Neither did peace in the valley for the next 30 years. So yes, if you've ever had a marriage proposal go wrong, at least it didn't end in a multi-generational blood feud. 3. Secret affections. Romantic relationships before marriage were discouraged and often dangerous. If a man attempted to seduce a woman without her family's consent, it could lead to serious legal consequences. And if a woman was caught in an unsanctioned relationship, it could damage her family's reputation and marriage prospects. But that didn't stop people from trying. Hidden meetings near rivers, and even poems left scratched into wood or bone. These weren't just cute notes, they were risky. If discovered, the young man could be challenged to a holmganga formal duel. Love for Vikings. A class of poets called skalds who composed intricate verse using metaphor, alliteration, and heroic imagery. Love poems, mannsingre, were a genre unto themselves, often written by warriors to praise the beauty and spirit of the women they loved. Here's a reconstructed line from a 10th century love poem. Greater than your eyes are stars over stormy sea, your voice, the thaw of spring on ice. I would sail 10 fjords to hear it twice. Romantic, yes, but also dangerous. In certain regions, it was illegal to write mansinger about a woman without her family's consent. Why? Because it could damage her reputation. Some men were fined or exiled for composing romantic verse considered too bold. So, poetry was a double-edged sword, beautiful but risky. Very Viking. -5. Women's role in Viking courtship. Viking women were not passive players in the marriage market. They couldn't always choose their partners freely, but they wielded more autonomy than many of their medieval counterparts. Women could reject a suitor, particularly if the bride price wasn't sufficient, inherit property, making them attractive. Matches. Divorce a husband with public declaration, claim back their dowry. If mistreated, sagas even mention women who issued ultimatums, suitors to return with trophies of war or land before they'd agree to marriage. And once married, Viking women managed the home, the farm, and often the finances. They held kisa, literal and symbolic gesture of power. Courtship, for women, was less about being chosen and more about choosing when the terms were finally right. -6. Marriage ceremonies, mead, swords, and symbolism. My Viking wedding was an elaborate affair, often stretching across several days and involving entire communities. Once the bride price was settled and the families aligned, the ceremony itself blended legal formality with pagan ritual. Key wedding elements included the hand fasting. The couple's hands were bound together with ribbon or cloth as vows were spoken. Sword exchange. The groom offered his ancestral sword to the bride, and she offered a sword to be passed to future sons. The bridal cup shared sips of mead, signifying unity. The bed ceremony. The couple was led to their bed by witnesses symbolizing public approval of their union. And yes, there were plenty of toasts, roasted animals, and bardic songs sung by drunken uncles. One Viking proverb went, "Better a short marriage with ale than a long one without. Cheers. -7. If love failed, divorce and remarriage. Viking law allowed for divorce. No paperwork, just spoken truth. Common reasons included: infidelity, abuse, or neglect, lack of support, embarrassing behavior. Yes, some saga heroines married multiple times, wielding political power through strategic unions. Unlike other medieval cultures, divorce didn't mean disgrace. In fact, a strong divorce could enhance a woman's reputation as long as she handled it with dignity and sharp legal wit. -8. Awkward love in the sagas. The Icelandic sagas are filled with stories of love, most of them predictably awkward. In the saga of Gunnlaug Serpent-Tongue, two poets fall in love with the same woman. They spend years composing dueling verses, avoiding battle only to eventually fight a fatal duel over a woman who ends up marrying someone else entirely. In the saga of Hallgard, a beautiful but proud woman cycles through 3 husbands, none of whom she particularly loves, all of whom end poorly. One slaps her in public. She later refuses to help him during a siege. He dies. It's a masterclass in icy revenge. Love was rarely tidy in Viking literature. It was messy, dramatic, and tangled in obligations. But always, it was deeply human. -9. Tokens and talismans. Love in symbols. Though Vikings didn't have engagement rings as we know them, they did exchange gifts of intental-fun objects carved with runes or made from shared spoils. Popular love tokens included beads of amber or glass, locks of hair wrapped in linen, miniature weapons or animal figures, runestones etched with shared names or messages. These items weren't just gifts, they were oaths, binding the giver to the recipient in the eyes of gods and community. A broken promise could carry not just shame, but legal repercussions. Viking courtship was anything but carefree. It was governed by laws, honor codes, family negotiations, and a surprising amount of poetry. Real emotions, longing, jealousy, loyalty, and love, whether whispered into the wind or carved into stone. As sleep draws near, picture a snow-covered village under a northern sky. A suitor adjusts his wool cloak, sword at his hip, and knocks on a door. Inside, a father weighs a silver ring in his palm. Somewhere, a skald strums a harp and sings a love song about stars and storms. And far away, where sages sat cross-legged beside golden thrones and dancers spun in silk, love was not whispered in corners, it was shouted from the royal balcony. Quite literally, enter the Swayamvara event that combined royal marriage, national diplomacy, public spectacle, and sometimes open combat. It was part ceremony, part contest, and entirely awkward for everyone involved. The Sanskrit word Swayamvara means self-choice of a husband. But don't let that fool you into thinking this was a free-flowing affair of romantic selection. It was an elite, high-pressure ritual where dozens or hundreds of kings, warriors, and princes competed for a bride-a-thon, while her father gave side commentary from the sidelines. Let's travel back 2,500 years and witness courtship through the lens of scripture, epic, and an exhausting number of gold necklaces. -1. Marriage as dharma, not drama. In ancient India, marriage wasn't a personal decision. It was a dharma, sacred duty, enshrined in Vedic scriptures and societal expectations. Among royal families, marriage meant alliances. For commoners, it meant stability and social order. And for everyone, it meant responsibility. Love, passion, and attraction were real, but they were secondary. What mattered most were the Varna social class, Gotra clan, or lineage, and the alignment of astrological charts. In fact, if your moon sign didn't align with your partner's house of Venus, your romantic destiny might get cancelled by a priest. This is where Swayamvara came in. It allowed some space, particularly for princesses, to choose their husbands from a selection that had already passed all tests of lineage, class, and cosmic approval. -2. Swayamvara explained, "Princess, here's how it usually went. 1. The king's announcement. A royal hall would be decorated with flower garlands, sacred fires, elephants, or on horseback, often bringing lavish gifts and armies in tow, just in case things got spicy." 4. The princess enters, adorned in silk, jewels, and perfume. The bride entered with her retinue of attendants, sometimes with a garland in hand, sometimes with a golden tray of offerings. 5. The choice begins. She walked past each suitor, often looking down modestly, but very strategically, while musicians played and the audience whispered predictions. 6. The garland moment. At last, she would stop before the man of her choice, raise the garland, and place it around his neck. Victory, maybe. 7. Optional bonus round. If multiple suitors objected, or if the father changed his mind, a duel. Yes, the romantic equivalent of a gladiator battle. Famous Swayamvaras from epics and why they were complicated. The Swayamvara appears often in Hindu mythology and Sanskrit epics, particularly the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Here are two of the most awkward and dramatic ones. Swayamvara Ramayana. Sita's father, King Janaka, declared that only a man who could lift and string the legendary bow of Shiva could marry his daughter. Kings from all over India came and failed. They couldn't even move the bow, let alone string it. Then Rama, a soft-spoken prince in exile, stepped forward. Not only did he lift the bow, he broke it in half. Sita garlanded him on the spot. Everyone cheered, except the rival suitors, who considered starting a war. Her father had to calm them down. Awkward level, 9/10. A broken bow, wounded egos, and almost starting a war. B. Draupadi's Swayamvara Mahabharata. Draupadi's Swayamvara had a twist. The suitor had to string a giant bow and shoot an arrow into a rotating fish's eye while looking at its reflection in water. Dozens failed. Then, a disguised Prince Arjuna succeeded. Draupadi garlanded him. Their mother mistakenly told them to share whatever they had brought home. And so Draupadi married 5 brothers. Awkward level, 11/10. 5 husbands. A weird archery test, and a very confused mother-in-law. -4. Was it really the woman's choice? While the term Swayamvara suggests the woman chose her husband, the truth was more complex. Her choices were pre-approved. Often, her father set the terms of the challenge, ensuring certain suitors had the advantage. In some cases, women were pressured to choose the politically or astrologically ideal man. Still, it offered more agency than in many other ancient cultures. For royal women, it was a moment of public empowerment, however ceremonial. Imagine standing in front of 200 heavily armed men while your dad watches from a throne, and the whole kingdom holds its breath as you decide who's worthy of your garland. no pressure. 5. Gifts and token awkwardness. Every suitor came bearing gifts: ivory, gold, elephants, horses, embroidered silks, and, in one extreme case, a mountain of rice. These weren't just tokens, they were tests. The father would often compare the gifts, whispering things like, "Well, King Vikrama brought 40 camels, but Prince Harshvardhan brought just 2 tigers." Some princesses received poetic verses from secret admirers. Others were serenaded by veena players trying to win their favor. Still others, like in the tale of Subhadra, sister of Krishna, eloped mid-Swayamvara with the man they love, leaving a room full of confused suitors holding gold platters and wondering what just happened. -6 for commoners. Quiet love. Loud in Losfer, the non-royal population. Marriage was less dramatic, but equally complex. Courtship was conducted through matchmakers, gotoks, family, friends, and neighborhood gossip. Compatibility was decided based on caste, horoscope, profession, number of cows owned. Once a match was found, the families negotiated dowries, exchanged turmeric and coconut, and sent the young couple off to live in extended households, often with 12 other relatives, 5 goats, and 1 cranky grandmother. Romantic privacy. None. Awkward mornings spent trying not to hold hands in front of your in-laws. Countless. -7. Love after marriage. Tender or tragic, despite the heavy scripting of marriage, many couples grew close. Sanskrit literature is filled with stories of spouses writing love letters, whispering beneath the moonlight, or meeting at sacred rivers. One poem from the Gita Govinda describes a wife waiting for her husband. "Greater than I braid my hair, not for myself, but in hope of your eyes falling upon it. My heart is an anklet silent until you step." Yet there are darker stories: 2 forced matches, child marriages, or tragic separations due to war or exile. Courtship in ancient India was full of potential for affection or awkwardness, devotion or distance. The Swayamvara was a blend of honor, challenge, and pageantry-like an ancient reality show, but with real swords. It gave women a sliver of choice in a deeply patriarchal world, while turning marriage into national theater. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, imagine a royal hall draped in jasmine and marigold. Princes sit in polished armor, holding garlands and swords. A girl in silk walks quietly, heart pounding. She stops. She lifts the garland. The music pauses. Somewhere outside, a poet writes down the moment in verse, and the ancient game of awkward love begins again. If Roman romance was legalistic, and Viking love was poetic, yet brutal, courtship in imperial China was delicate, almost invisible. It tiptoed through ancestral obligations, slipped behind silk screens, and often hid in poems inked on folding fans. From the Han Dynasty to the Qing, spanning to millennia of dynastic rule, Chinese relationships were shaped by Confucian ideals, family honor, and a deep reverence for tradition, and slipped through the cracks like a plum blossom caught in the wind. And yet, people still fell in love, or tried to. But when even a glance could be scandalous, courtship became an art of restraint where gestures whispered what mouths could not speak, and lovers often didn't even meet until the wedding day. -1. The Confucian curtain. Hierarchy over heart. To understand Chinese courtship, one must first understand Confucianism, the system of ethics and order. that governed every layer of society. In Confucian ideology, filial piety, respect for parents, was the highest virtue. Individual desires were subordinate to family duty. Women were expected to be silent, modest, and obedient. Men were expected to uphold virtue, honor, and hierarchy. Love was not a priority. It was, at best, a bonus, at worst, a disruptive force that could unravel a family's carefully maintained social standing. So, marriages were arranged. They negotiated dowries and horoscopes, not affection. A son or daughter who dared to fall in love unsupervised risked dishonor, disinheritance, or worse, being locked in the back courtyard for months with only embroidery and regret for company. -2. The matchmaker, mistress of awkward introductions. No romantic saga in imperial China began without a matchmaker. Mayrin, often a middle-aged woman armed with gossip, scrolls of lineage, and the subtle social power to arrange Ruana family's future. Her duties included studying compatibility based on the BAZI8 characters of birth time, confirming family reputation, carrying verbal inquiries between households, negotiating the dowry and bride price, sometimes spying a little just to be sure. These matchmakers were powerful. They knew who was poor despite appearances, who had a drunk uncle, and who had failed the imperial exams 3 times and was now pretending to grow oranges. The matchmaker's report could make or break a proposal. Imagine all your romantic potential boiled down to how polite you were to your aunts and whether your grandfather was once jailed for rice theft. -3. The marriage market, literally, a market in some regions, especially during the Thames and Song dynasties. Marriage markets emerged. These were public events, sometimes set in temple fairs where families gathered with portraits, name scrolls, and birth charts to trade matchmaking info. It wasn't dating. It was public resume exchange, with hopeful mothers whispering, greater than, he's a minor bureaucrat, but his cousin just passed the Jinshi exams. Meanwhile, prospective grooms might stroll by with peacock feathers in their hats, subtly indicating their status. Peacocking, before, it was cool. Privacy, 0. Awkward glances, thousands. 4. First encounters, a curtain between you. Even in elite families, the couple often never saw each other until the wedding. If they did, it was from behind a bamboo screen, glimpsed through a silk curtain at a family banquet, reflected in a pond during a chaperoned garden visit. Some more liberal households allowed poetry exchanges strictly chaperoned. A hopeful young man might compose a verse comparing the girl's eyebrows to willow leaves and her voice to the zither. Her response, usually filtered through her father, a servant, or a poem so vague that even today scholars argue what it meant. 1. Surviving line reads, greater than in the quiet courtyard, the plum blossoms fall before they bloom. Was she rejecting him, lamenting her fate, or just commenting on the weather? We may never know. -5. The hairpin and the fan, secret tokens of loving, a society where open romance was taboo. Courtship thrived in symbols. A dropped hairpin in front of a man could signal interest. A folded fan returned unopened might mean rejection. An embroidered handkerchief, gifted discreetly, could carry a poem stitched in code. One popular trick, a woman might drop a silk slipper at a temple festival. If the man returned it respectfully and looked away, he was honorable. If he held it too long, scandalous. These rituals were subtle. A misplaced glance could ignite gossip that burned through an entire village. So, love became a language of objects, and every gesture was a line of poetry under surveillance. 6. The 4 pillars of compatibility. Forget chemistry. In imperial China, you needed astrological endorsement to fall in love. The bride and groom's birth dates were analyzed according to Marcio, heavenly stems, earthly branches. 5 elements, wuxing yin and yang, balance. If your fire clashed with their water, or your metal overwhelmed their wood, you were incompatible even if you looked amazing in matching hanfu. Astrologers sometimes claimed a girl was destined to harm her husband's parents based on her chart. These girls were called kefasand, were often avoided, even if they were brilliant or beautiful. One tale describes a wealthy man rejecting 5 perfect women before finally marrying a goat to appease his ancestors. The goat died. The man remarried. No comment. 7. Wedding day. Seeing each other for the first time at last. Musicians played gongs. Firecrackers popped. Children rolled oranges beneath her seat for luck. She was led into the house, guided by a red silk ribbon. The groom lifted her veil with a stick. For many, this was the first time they saw each other's faces. Imagine that moment. Months of negotiation, family scrutiny, astrological charts, and now you're staring at a stranger across a candlelit table. Your fingernails, awkward and beautiful. 8 letters across a lifetime, despite the awkward beginnings. Many couples developed real affection. Love grew slowly through hardship, meals shared, children raised, and letters written during war or exile. One Ming Dynasty husband wrote to his wife, "Though 10,000 miles separate us, my thoughts ride the wind to your pillow. Keep warm." Scold the child for ignoring his lessons. "I dream of your laughter under plum trees." Love bloomed quietly, like orchids in a scholar's study, hidden from view, yet deeply felt. Imperial Chinese courtship was more etiquette than emotion. It moved like a fan, dance graceful, precise, and choreographed by elders. But within that quiet choreography were moments of rebellion, poetry, and deep devotion. So tonight, as the stars blink quietly outside your window, imagine a jade garden under moonlight. A girl walks softly, fan pressed to her cheek. Behind a screen, a boy reads her poem, his hands trembling. Somewhere, a matchmaker sips tea and smiles, already planning another awkward miracle. Love, though restrained, has always found its waven when it has to write itself into silk. Ancient Egypt, the land of pyramids. For centuries, it was one of the most sophisticated civilizations in history, ruled by divine pharaohs and powered by the ever-faithful Nile. But behind all the gold and granite, oh, how those hearts tangled in the webs of tradition, propriety, scent, and suggestion, in a culture that prized order, harmony, math, and social roles. Love had to fit in clean lines, like a lotus painted on a temple wall. Yet, even in this orderly world, Egyptian courtship throbbed with tenderness, tension, and the ever-present possibility of scandal over a misplaced glance. I love among the Nile reeds. Romantic affection in ancient Egypt wasn't taboo, but it wasn't entirely casual either. The Egyptians were surprisingly open about desire, but also precise about roles. Propriety balanced with private longing. Young men and women might fall in love at temple festivals, village markets, or along the canal paths. Yet rarely did they act on impulse. Every gesture had meaning. Every look could lead to expectation or exile, and always watching. Parents, neighbors, and sometimes the gods themselves, -2 eyeliner, linen, and first impressions. The Egyptians believed that outer beauty reflected inner harmony. Courtship, therefore, began with presentation and, not subtly. Men and women alike bathed frequently, oiled their skin, and wore garments of sheer white linen. They lined their eyes with kohl, not just for fashion, but for spiritual protection. And sun glare reduction perfume was critical. Popular scents included frankincense and myrrh, blue lotus essence, a mild aphrodisiac, closing parenthesis, .kyphi, a sacred blend of herbs, wine, and honey. To express interest, a man might stand near a woman during a public celebration and let the scent of lotus oil drift toward her. No words, just fragrance, and if she stayed, that was her yes. -3. Poetry and papyrus. The whispered love letter Egyptians were prolific poets. From the New Kingdom period, 1550 to 1070 BCE, we have dozens of surviving love poems inscribed on papyrus, walls, and pottery shards. These poems are dreamy, tender, and sometimes heartbreakingly awkward. Greater than it is her voice that makes me live. When I hear her, I grow young again. Her lips are honey, and her breath is cool, but I must pretend I do not notice her. Passed me by, her robe brushing my hand. I dropped my basket. She did not turn. I bent to pick it up, and stayed bent for far too long. These weren't just words, they were coded messages. Written poems were passed through friends, hidden in gifts, or scribbled on river rocks and left near a lover's path. The goal: to declare emotion without declaring anything at all. -4. Dating in the time of deities. Much of love and marriage in Egypt was tied to the gods. Courtship didn't just happen between two people. It echoed the sacred pairings of divine couples, Isis and Osiris, symbols of enduring love, Ra and Hathor, representing passion and playfulness, Nut and Geb, the sky and earth locked in, eternal yearning. Invoking these deities in poetry or small amulets was common. Bad omens like a broken sandal on a holy date might be taken as a divine sign that the relationship was doomed. Courtship could end in a single sneeze during the wrong lunar phase. 5. When you couldn't speak. Flirting with your Eastern elite circles, especially. Talking openly to a love interest was considered inappropriate, particularly for unmarried women. But love always finds a way. Women were trained in eye communication, literally. Glances were used like arrows. A downward gaze equals modest interest, not appearance. Instead of "you're beautiful," maybe, but when even eye contact had consequences. Or noble families arranged marriages based on social class, work skills, political ties, proximity to the royal court. A young man in love might send his parents to propose on his behalf. This involved offering a bride price not to buy, but to show respect, presenting gifts, beer, bread, jewelry, or even live ducks, reciting his family line and job title with dramatic flair. If the girl's father accepted, great. If not, heartbreaking. Possibly curses involving crocodiles or eternal singleness. 7. Marriage contracts. Love with legal edits. When a couple did marry, It was formalized with a marriage contract detailing each partner's property and rights, inheritance plans for future children, clauses for divorce. Yes, Egypt allowed it. One 2,600-year-old contract reads, "If he leaves her." Not exactly Cupid's language, but very practical, Egyptian. Courtship always walked the line between affection and function. Some ended in sorrow, exile, or even death. Priestesses, for instance. A relationship even whispered could result in banishment or punishment from the gods. One tale tells of a temple scribe who fell in love with a singer of Hathor. They met at dawn in the lotus grove, exchanging poems and pastries. She became a healer in a far-off village. They never saw each other again. But their letters found, centuries later, folded with dried petals, survived. -9. Ghost, love, and afterlife affairs. Egyptians believed strongly in the afterlife, and that emotions, including love, could transcend death. Tombs often contained messages between spouses, such as, "Greater than though your body rests, your heart beats in mine. I wait beside your shrine, as you once waited beside our door." Some even feared ghostly jealousy. If a widow remarried too soon, it was believed her late husband's spirit might haunt the house, spill beer, or make the goats run backward. So, courtship had to wait, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. Courtship in ancient Egypt was precise, poetic, and painfully indirect. It tiptoed through ritual and perfume, floated in poems and papyrus, and bloomed in fleeting glances during a lotus festival. Yet, it was also enduring. Egyptians fell in love, married, divorced, and mourned, just as we do today, only with a bit more eyeliner and a lot more fanfare. So, as you close your eyes tonight, imagine the soft glow of oil lamps on painted walls. A scribe leans over a scroll, heart pounding, composing a line of verse for the girl who smiled at him by the river. Somewhere nearby, a breeze carries the scent of lotus oil and sandalwood, and the gods smile quietly. Love, awkward and ancient, waits once more beneath the shadow of the pyramids. The Middle Ages, stretching from roughly the 5th to the 15th century, are often imagined as a time of damsels in distress, knights on quests, and troubadours serenading maidens from beneath crumbling castle towers. The reality, courtship in medieval Europe was a complex stew of piety, patriarchy, and awkward poetic metaphors involving falcons and roses. Whether you were a peasant plowing fields or a noblewoman sewing tapestries in a drafty keep, love was both a duty and a danger. It could elevate you to sainthood, send you straight to a monastery. Romance was rare. Marriage was a delicat's begin with the awkward. Truth, romantic love and marriage almost never overlapped. Marriage was about property, political alliances, family lineage, and who could offer the largest plot of land or the most sheep in noble families. Children were betrothed while still in their cradles. Parents arranged everything: the dowry, the estate transfers, and who would bring the bigger banner to the wedding procession. Personal feelings entirely irrelevant. If a young woman dared to express her preference, her father might scowl, the bishop might intervene, and her suitor might challenge someone to a duel out of sheer confusion. -2. Courtly love, the fantasy of yearning. The concept of courtly love emerged in the 12th century, particularly in southern France and northern Italy. It was an artificial, rule-bound game of love, practiced mainly in theory among nobles, troubadours, and daydreaming scribes, and it came with strict rules. The man must adore a lady of higher rank. She must be unattainable, often married. He must suffer in silence. She must remain virtuous, distant, and only slightly flattered. This created a peculiar tradition, where men wrote poems about women they could never marry, performed brave deeds just to earn a glance, fainted dramatically if she dropped her glove. One troubadour, Bernard de Ventadorn, once wrote, "Her eyes, like burning sapphires, wound me. Her glove, fallen, is a dagger in my heart." All this without even a handshake. -3. Poetry and the groan-worthy metaphors. Troubadours and knights were expected to compose lyrical odes to the women they admired. These weren't short love notes. They were full of allegory. The lady as a rose, the man as a falcon, packed with religious imagery, because apparently love was just as confusing as theology, often written in Old Occitan, a language even they barely understood. One preserved verse declares, "Greater than my soul is the deer hunted by your gaze, my heart the banner on your castle wall." It sounds poetic until you realize most of these were sung in quavering falsetto by men in tights under balconies that echoed terribly. -4. Chivalry, love, loyalty, and lopsided expectation. Chivalry was the knight's code. Protect the weak, honor your lord, and worship the lady. But it came with some deeply awkward romantic expectations. The knight must serve the lady as if she were a queen. He must never presume physical closeness. He must pine endlessly, possibly for years. This led to extreme gestures, including wearing a lady's token, a glove, a ribbon, even a broken commento battle, refusing to marry until winning her favor, which might never happen, writing elaborate declarations of love to someone he'd spoken to, ... Once, one knight reportedly rode into a tournament wearing a lady's undergarments over his armor. The crowd cheered, the lady blushed, the bishop fainted. -5. The gift game, apples, gloves, and dried flowers. Courtship gifts in medieval Europe were oddly specific. Apples or pears symbolized fertility. Dried lavender meant devotion. Gloves were intimate offering. One was like saying, "I suffer for you." If a woman accepted the glove, it was a green light, well, yellow at best. If she returned it, the man might write 3 new poems about rejection and walk dramatically in the rain. More elaborate tokens included embroidered favor ribbons, miniature portraits on wood panels, books of hours, small prayer books, sometimes inscribed with secret dedications. One court record mentions a suitor who gifted a live peacock. The lady's family ate it. The suitor wrote a sonnet about betrayal. -6. Peasant love, simpler, but no less awkward. While nobles were composing endless ballads, peasants were far more practical. Courtship among common folk was community-based, neighbors often arranged. Introductions. Seasonal. Many couples met during festivals or harvests, sneaky because premarital contact was frowned upon. If a man liked a woman, he might help her with her chores, sing a verse at a May Day, dance. Leave small gifts on her doorstep. If she accepted his wooden spoon, yes, this was a real thing. He might visit her family, accompanied by his father and a sheep. The sheep was essential. No sheep, no bride. -7. The church, watching everything and disapproving of most of it. The medieval Catholic Church had mixed feelings about love. Marriage was a sacrament, meant for procreation. Sex outside of marriage was a sin. Secret engagements were frowned upon. Couples had to post bans, public notices before marrying, avoid consanguinity, being related within 7 degrees, confusing and often incorrectly calculated, have witnesses to the marriage to ensure it was real. Despite all this, the church rarely stopped elopements, especially when local priests were bribed with enough cheese. But it did frown deeply upon things like holding hands in the pews, whispering during Mass, excessive lute playing beneath windows after sunset. -8. Wedding ceremonies, bells, bread, and bathtubs. Medieval wedding was more legal than romantic. The essentials, consent of both parties spoken aloud, dowry agreements signed by both families, a public ceremony followed by a feast. Some ceremonies included strange customs, the groom smashing a loaf of bread over the bride's head, guests pelting the couple with oats for fertility, leading the couple to the bedding chamber, with song and candlelight often, while neighbors peeked through the curtains. Romantic, not exactly memorable. Absolutely. -9. If love failed, forbidden affairs. And public shaman-happy marriages were common. Divorce was nearly impossible, except for extreme cases involving consanguinity or impotence. So affairs became a dangerous outlet. One famous scandal, Eleanor of Aquitaine, allegedly encouraged courtly love at her court in Poitiers. This led to dozens of knights writing letters to married ladies, at least one duel over a rose, a bishop publishing an official guide against adulterous metaphors. Caught lovers could be publicly flogged.exiled.org, forced to carry bread with iron chains around the village square. One man was caught writing a love poem using communion wafers. He was not forgiven. Love in medieval Europe was a contradiction, publicly restrained but privately obsessed over. While marriages were made at the family table, emotions spilled into poems, songs, and the damp corridors of candlelit castles. So tonight, as you close your eyes, picture a knight in dented armor, clutching a glove he smelled far too many times. Somewhere in a distant keep, a lady sighs as she reads a poem that compares her to a dove and a pie at the same time. The minstrels play, the fire crackles, and love, awkward and armored, waits again by the castle gates in feudal Japan, stretching from the Kamakura period 1185 through the Edo era 1603 to 1868. Romance was a quiet, deliberate, and often painfully formal affair, unlike the dramatic swooning of medieval Europe or the poetic festivals of ancient Egypt. Japanese courtship moved through stillness. It murmured in folded fans, rustled in bamboo groves, and passed between lacquered doors like incense smoke. Love in feudal Japan was not absent, it was just disciplined, coded, and terrifyingly indirect. -1. The art of not saying. Courtship was conducted within the social rules of Confucian. Hierarchy imported from China. Buddhist detachment, emotions equals suffering. And Bushido, the samurai code of conduct, stoicism over softness. So how did anyone fall in love? Slowly, silently, and with the dramatic intensity of someone who wrote 10 haikus about a sleeve brushing against their own. For women, modesty was paramount. For men, especially those of samurai rank. Open declarations of affection were considered foolish, bordering on dishonorable. Instead, love was expressed through calligraphy, gift exchange, carefully chosen words in carefully controlled moments. Imagine someone handing you a painted fan with 3 characters on it and waiting months for your reaction. That's courtship. -2. Arranged marriages, family first, feelings. Eventually, as in many ancient cultures, marriages were arranged specially. Among the nobility and samurai classes, matches were made based on clan, affiliation, social status, land ownership, and the strategic benefit of alliances. The young couple usually didn't meet until the wedding night. Families used go-betweens, nakodo, who delivered proposals, family records, and a list of acceptable qualities, including calligraphy skill, teeth condition, and knowledge of poetry. Love wasn't expected at the start, but if it bloomed later, that was considered a pleasant bonus. Like getting a good melon with your rice. -3. The Pillow Book, Courtship by Diary 1. Of the most revealing insights into romance among Japan's aristocracy comes from the pillow book Makura no Tsukushi by Sei Shinagan. Written in the 11th century Heian era, she described how noble lovers would visit each other only at night, enter through side corridors to avoid gossip, leave before dawn, so no servants could witness their shameful happiness. Morning after etiquette was excruciatingly formal. The man had to send a poetic letter, possibly with a flower or folded silk token, express longing without sounding eager, and gratitude without suggesting attachment. A bad morning letter meant no second visit. -4. Samurai. Love, stoic men, subtle moves. Samurai were expected to embody honor, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. Emotions were fine so long as they were buried so deep that even your ancestors couldn't detect them so. Samurai courtship was brief. Ritualized. Often mediated by poetry or third parties. One famous samurai reportedly confessed his love by sharpening his sword in front of a woman's family, then carving a cherry blossom into his scabbard. When asked what it meant, he replied, "Greater than beauty meets restraint." Another simply gave a woman a piece of polished obsidian and walked away. She married him 3 years later. -5. Love letters, ink, tears, and timing calligraphy was more than writing. It was an art form and one of the most powerful tools of romance. The perfect love letter required high-quality washi paper. The right brush technique strokes should show emotion, not messines, closing parenthesis. An appropriate poetic reference, nature equals emotion. 4. Example, greater than I saw the crane's wing, white and alone. The sky felt full of questions. Your absence writes wind on my window, subtle, indirect, and heavy with imagery. The recipient might spend days interpreting it or consult a friend just to decode it. The wrong metaphor, a single ink blot. Rejected. -6. Fans and folding screens. Secret language of desire. When lovers couldn't speak or write, they signaled with props. Fans were an entire language of flirtation. Opened and placed in front of the mouth equals interest. Closed abruptly equals rejection. Left behind in the garden equals invitation. Folding screens in homes and palaces also played a role. A man might be invited to sit on the other side of a screen while the woman painted or read aloud. They didn't see each other. They just heard each other's breath, perhaps exchanged verses. Romance through a wall. Minimal contact, maximum emotion. -7. Geisha and the illusion of romance. Not all love in feudal Japan was for marriage. The geisha, highly trained entertainers and artists, offered companionship, flirtation, and romantic fantasy, but not, contrary to myth, always sexual intimacy. Closing parenthesis. Men visited tea houses, shamisen music. Political conversation. With a side of expertly performed eye contact, geisha knew how to simulate affection, using timing, voice, and fan gestures. Many men fell in love. Few were truly loved back. And if a samurai cried over a geisha, he did so privately, and then blamed the moon. -8. Forbidden love, monks, maids, and mishaps. Despite all rules, illicit relationships happened. Samurai fell for servants. Monks broke their vows. Ladies-in-waiting shared notes with couriers. One famous scandal involved a daimyo's daughter eloping with her sword trainer. They escaped across the mountains. His horse broke a leg. He carried her for 12 miles. They were caught, married anyway, and lived out their days in obscurity and local ballads. Forbidden love was punished with exile, forced separation, or shaving one's head and becoming a monk or nun, which, for some, was more appealing than another year of interpreting fan positions. -9. Marriage. The night you meet your spouse. When the wedding finally happened, it was a study in restraint. The bride wore a white kimono, symbolizing death to her old family. The groom often saw her for the first time during the ceremony. They drank sake in a sansankudo ritual, 3 sips from 3 cups. Then silence, no fireworks, no loud celebration, just a solemn walk to their new room, where servants left them alone. And what did they talk about? Well, if they liked each other, poetry. If they didn't, the weather. Final thoughts, feudal Japanese. Courtship was an exercise in patience, poetry, and sublime awkwardness. It was a system of invisible gestures, refined expressions, and long nights staring at inked paper, wondering if your cherry blossom metaphor was too obvious. But within that stillness was a deep reverence for emotion, quiet, careful, but real. So, tonight, as you drift into dreams, imagine a bamboo grove at twilight, a soft rustle of silk robes, a brushstroke on rice paper, drying just slowly enough to hold a whisper of someone's longing. And outside, a crane calls across the mist, carrying the sound of unspoken love into the wind. The Aztec Empire, flourishing in central Mexico from the 14th to early 16th century, was a world of stunning complexity, precise calendars, floating farms, golden temples, and deeply uncomfortable love rituals. At the center of it all was Tenochtitlan, a grand lake city of dazzling markets, towering pyramids, and causeways wide enough for armies. But beneath the obsidian knives and turquoise jewelry beat the hearts of people who longed, dreamed, and stumbled through the terrifying terrain of love, in a society that honored gods with blood and crops with human hearts. Romance had a very specific place, and stepping outside it could cost more than your reputation. Love, but keep it holy and heavily supervised. For the Aztecs, love was not a private matter, it was a social obligation, and like everything else in their civilization, it was structured. Marriage was expected, especially by adulthood, carefully monitored by parents, priests, and elders. considered sacred, but also strategic, as it tied together clans, Kalpuli community units, and economic alliances. Romantic relationships were not forbidden, but unstructured ones. Those could lead to gossip, dishonor, or being sacrificed on the wrong calendar day. So yes, courtship existed, but it was rarely spontaneous. It was a step-by-step, incense-scented. Schools with crushes. Aztec youth were educated in two types of schools: Comicac, for noble children especially, future priests and leaders; Telpachagli, for commoner boys, focusing on warfare and discipline. Both schools encouraged chastity and obedience. But let's be honest, teenagers will notice each other, even beneath feathered cloaks and strict supervision. Love blossomed through glances during festivals, songs sung at dawn, performed by youth groups for the community poetry competitions, where the line between metaphor and personal confession blurred dangerously. A poorly chosen metaphor could be social suicide. Greater than your eyes, like maize kernels, make me hungry too. Never mind. -3. Poetry. Love confessions in Quetzal Feather's poetry. In the Aztec world was a spiritual and emotional expression, and also a safe way to flirt. Young men composed verses filled with nature metaphors, flowers, birds, rain, fire, references to fate. Since the Aztecs were obsessed with destiny, subtle declarations, since being too forward was deeply disrespectful. Here's a translated snippet from a Nahuatl love poem. My heart blooms for you, like the cactus flower hidden in thorns. I walk beside you unseen, but I carry your scent in the folds of my cape. If a girl responded with her own poem, the boy would brag for weeks. If she said nothing, he would offer it to the gods and pretend it was always about them. -4. Chocolate, the first love potion. If there was one material in Aztec romance more powerful than words, it was cacao. Cacao beans were currency. Cacao drinks, often bitter, spicy, and frothy, were reserved for nobles and lovers. Sharing cacao was intimate, the equivalent of handing someone your Netflix password and a toothbrush dot to woo someone. A man might offer a painted gourd filled with spiced cacao, add vanilla or chili, symbolizing heat and sweetness, deliver it during a festival, while bowing low and never making direct eye contact. If she drank it, victory. If she poured it on the ground, seek forgiveness from Quetzalcoatl and go grow corn. -5. Matchmakers and elders, the real power players, forget spontaneous love. Most Aztec marriages were arranged with the help of a professional matchmaker, often a woman known as a Siwatlampa. The process. The boy's family consulted a Tanalpauk calendar priest to find an auspicious wedding date based on birth charts. The matchmaker visited the girl's family multiple times, bringing gifts of maize, cloaks, and smoked turkey. After a yes, the bride was delivered at midnight, often with crying, incense, and intense family pressure. And the boy, he was waiting on a reed mat, wide-eyed, dressed in his best jaguar pelt cape, probably trying not to panic. 6. Courtship rules for boys. Respect or be cursed. Young men were taught the rules of proper affection in school. Some strict guidelines: no touching without marriage, no poetry reciting in dark corners, never speak of a girl's beauty in public, only her virtues, like weaving skill or humility. One elder reportedly told a group of boys, "If you chase girls before planting season, your fields will dry and your children will be born with crooked toes." Subtle. If a young man disrespected a girl, he could be punished with public beating, ritual sweat lodge purification, ban from temple festivals, where all the cute people were. 7. Young women, weaving, waiting, and whispered songs girls were raised to be modest, skilled, and attentive to. Family honor. Love, if it came, had to be patient, silent, and blessed by her elders. But girls weren't powerless. They wrote songs and sang them at dawn ceremonies, crafted flower garlands that could be offered discreetly, sent subtle messages by the arrangement of their market stall items. If she arranged her maze in a spiral, she liked you. If it was in rows, you were as interesting as yesterday's tortillas. 8. The wedding fire. Feathers and first meetings. Aztec weddings were grand and highly ritualized. The bride and groom met at night. Their capes were tied together by the matchmaker, symbolizing unity. They circled the hearth 4 times, tossed incense into the flames, and offered prayers to gods of fertility and household harmony. Then came the feast, with tamales, stews, and pulque, a fermented maguey drink, dances led by the elders. Always awkward, a formal speech about the burdens of marriage, just in case you were feeling too happy. The couple spent their first night in a special house, watched discreetly by relatives who would confirm that harmony had begun. Privacy, minimal, -9. If love failed, divorce and drama. All Aztec marriages worked out in, yes, divorce was allowed. Acceptable reasons, incompatibility, infertility, domestic disputes. If the in-laws were too loud, divorce rituals involved returning gifts, public acknowledgement of separation, possibly delivering your ex's sandals back to their family. As a final gesture, people whispered. Songs were written, but you were free to marry again immediately, with more chocolate and fewer misread maize arrangements. Aztec courtship was rich, ritualistic, and riddled with opportunities for misunderstanding. It wove love through calendars, cacao, incense, and obligation. Yet, within those confines, real affection blossomed, expressed not in loud declarations, but in poems slipped under mats and feathers tied to wristbands. So tonight, as the sky darkens and the stars shimmer like obsidian chips above a lake, imagine a boy offering a gourd of spicy cacao to a girl whose song he's heard only once. A flute plays somewhere in the distance. A priest murmurs blessings over flower petals, and beneath it all, 2 hearts wait talkward, hopeful, and wrapped in ceremonial smoke. The Victorian era, 1837 to 1901, was a time of empire, industry, and uncomfortable furniture. But while trains, telegraphs, and tea surged across Britain, the heart was expected to stay obediently inside its corset. Romantic feelings. Acceptable, but only when filtered through propriety, ritual, and a healthy dose of repression. Victorian courtship wasn't about passion, it was about timing, temperament, and the slow, agonizing buildup of affection over months, even years, without a single real conversation. The ultimate career move. Victorian courtship was less about love and more about life planning. For women, marriage was the only acceptable future outside spinsterhood or becoming a governess, a matter of status. security, and social alignment, evaluated based on the man's income, manners, and family reputation. For men, choosing a wife was often more about her dowry, if she had one, her manners, musical ability, and embroidery skills, her ability to bear sons without causing gossip, love, optional compatibility, ideal, reputation, non-negotiable. -2. Flirtation was a full-time job Victorian. Flirting was a sport, a skill, and a codebook. Since open flirtation was indecent, the game played out in glove dropping, handkerchief fidgeting, the language of fans. For example, dropping a handkerchief near someone equals invitation to speak. Twirling a parasol slowly equals interest. Touching your fan to your lips equals kiss me, you coward, or so the guidebooks claimed. Couples rarely spoke alone. They communicated in glances across drawing rooms, coded notes passed through younger siblings, and very slow, very chaste dances. -3. The calling card crisis. A gentleman could not simply walk up to a lady and introduce himself. That would be barbaric. Instead, he delivered a calling card to her home, the household. Servant took it to the lady of the house. If she approved, he might be invited to tea in 3 weeks. If the card was not returned, silent rejection. Lady burned it in the fireplace, as some did. Social death. In short, if you liked someone, you had to wait for her aunt's calendar to open. 4. Chaperones and the third wheel. Lifestyle. No respectable woman was ever allowed to be alone with a man. Enter the chaperone, usually a maiden aunt, a grumpy grandmother, or a mother whose only joy in life was ruining conversations, whether in carriage rides, parlor teas, or walks through Hyde Park. The chaperone followed closely, sometimes even walking between the two. 1852 etiquette guide stated, greater than a young lady must never be spoken to by a gentleman in a public place without a formal introduction and a third party present, preferably one who disapproves of the weather. -5. Love letters, gushing, grammar, and grave consequences. Victorian love letters were long, poetic, and horrifically overwritten. Example, my dearest Eleanor, I remain enslaved to the mere memory of your smile, which haunts my breakfast and troubles my socks. But the letters were dangerous if intercepted, scandal if too forward, rejected if burned in fury, smoke signals of heartbreak. Some couples wrote hundreds of letters over years without once using the word love directly. Instead, they wrote things like, I trust you found the May roses agreeable. The weather has been most agreeable, like your presence at Vauxhall. Victorian flirting was basically a spreadsheet of adjectives. 6. The courtship timeline, measured in teaspoons. Courtship unfolded in phases. 1. Initial introduction, via mutual friends or relatives. 2. Supervised visits, often with 4 or 5 observers. 3. Drawing room talks, awkward silences, included 4 public appearances, Sunday walks in full view of others. 5. Declaration of intent, where the man nervously requested permission to propose from the lady's father. If the woman blushed, that was practically engagement-level enthusiasm. 7. Proposal protocol, please marry me if your father approves. A Victorian proposal involved formal permission from the family patriarch, a planned meeting, ideally after tea and before dusk. No ring until permission was granted. The gentleman was expected to speak eloquently, often kneeling, sometimes trembling. If accepted, the lady might offer him a lock of hair. And no, it wasn't creepy unless it was a full braid. -8. The dreaded engagement. Rules and restrictions. Once engaged, the couple could sit in the same room without direct eye contact, exchange small gifts like books, gloves, or pressed flowers, take supervised walks in public. They still weren't allowed to be alone behind closed doors, use each other's first names in public, touch at all. No kisses, no hand-holding, one diarist wrote. Greater than it has been 3 months since our engagement, and I have not yet dared to ask her what her favorite soup is. 9. If love died, broken engagements and public shame-breaking in engagement was socially catastrophic, particularly for the woman. A man might recover. A woman, labeled as emotional, unstable, or worst of all, compromised, even if she never touched him. Entire novels were built around broken engagements, often ending in exile, death, or a long stay in Bath with judgmental cousins. -10. Marriage. From corsets to contract Victorian weddings were lavish if wealthy, modest if working class, filled with symbolism. White dresses, veils, bouquets, centered on the father giving the bride away literally and legally. Once married, the woman's identity was legally erased. She became Mrs. Husband's full name, legally his property, unable to own land or vote. Romance faded into duty. The honeymoon lasted one night. The repression, a lifetime Victorian courtship, was a masterclass in restraint, subtlety, and theatrical patience. Love was spoken in glances, tested by etiquette, and filtered through family approval, servant gossip, and fan twirls. Yet somehow, through all the rules and roses, many found real connection. Some even managed to kiss after months of writing about umbrellas and gardening. So tonight, as you drift into dreamland, imagine a foggy London park. A lady walks slowly, dropping a handkerchief. A gentleman rushes to return it, stammering about poetry and trousers. A chaperone coughs politely, and across the drawing room, a teacup rattles softly, signaling one more impossibly polite heartbeat. When you think of Vikings, you probably picture towering warriors, roaring across stormy seas, pillaging coastal towns, while swinging axes like oversized toothpicks. But beneath the layers of leather, the blood-stained tunics, and the dramatic saga, poetry, Vikings loved, awkwardly, passionately, and very, very loudly. Courtship in the Viking Age was less about roses and more about running stones, dowries, and whether your potential partner could kill a bear or churn butter without complaint. Marriage meant business, and sometimes a farm. As with most pre-modern cultures, marriage was not about romance, it was about land, alliance, and honor. To begin courting someone, the man had to ask her father or male guardian, bring gifts, not just flowers, but livestock, weapons, or silver, offer a bride price munder, which proved he was serious and financially stable. If the father agreed, the woman still had a say. Viking women were not property. They could reject a suitor, which made proposals an emotionally charged negotiation, involving her reputation, his deeds, and who had the better mead hall story. -2. Viking women had real power. Forget helpless damsels. Viking women owned property, could divorce their husbands, wielded swords occasionally, knew exactly how to make a suitor feel like a frostbitten fool if he disrespected her. A woman could walk out of a marriage if her husband was lazy. He wore low-cut tunics seriously. It was considered shameful. He insulted her in front of others. Or, worst of all, he lacked honor. The Norse version of being a total loser. Courtship was a two-way battlefield. 3. Hair. The Tinder profile of the Viking world appearance mattered in Viking romance, and hair was everything. Men braided their beards and oiled their hair with animal fat and herbs. Women wore their hair in long, thick braids, a sign of health and fertility. Loose hair, seen as wild or shameful, a single lock of hair offered to a lover, as intimate as sending a voice note of your heartbeat. -4. Flirting at the Thing and other public assemblies. The Thing, the local Viking assembly, was more than a place for laws and feuds. It was a chance to show off your new cloak, trade some amber beads, and maybe flirt with the farmer's daughter near the ox cart. Flirting was done through boasts. A man bragged about his voyages, battle wins, or how many sheep he could shear in an hour. In challenges, play wrestling, riddle contests, or dramatic saga recitals, gift exchanges, whale-tooth combs, silver arm rings, or delicately carved bone pins. The more clever your riddle or polished your brooch, the more attractive you were. -5. Poetry. Love in sagas. Heavy on metaphor. Viking love poetry, skaldic verse, was full of war metaphors, nature metaphors, and the occasional uncomfortable metaphor involving wolves and wind. Example, her eyes, like the sea after a storm, cut through me like Odin's spear. My heart lies broken like the ribs of a shattered longship. Vikings didn't fall in love, they were smashed by it. Delivering a well-written verse could win a lady's favor. Delivering a bad one, expect public ridicule and possibly a mild stabbing. -6. Courtship gifts. Not just jewelry. Courtship often included gifts with deep meaning. Bone combs. Cleanliness was prized offering. One said, "I notice your hair, and that's not creepy." Silver rings, carved with runes, sometimes spells for love, luck, or fertility. Rune stones. If a man really wanted to impress, he might carve a stone declaring his love publicly. Permanent, uneditable, very risky. Some lovers exchanged lockets filled with herbs, animal teeth carved with initials, or occasionally a helmet charm which screamed, "Marry me or die." -7. Viking engagements. Mead, contracts, and community gossip. Once courtship reached its peak, i.e., both parties stopped pretending to just trade fish, a betrothal feast was arranged. This included the exchange of gifts in front of witnesses, the signing of a marriage contract, and excessive drinking, which often led to awkward declarations like, "Greater than you're the only woman I'd give my best axe to." The feast was also a community announcement. Prepare for one more. Couple to argue over turnip planting rights. -8. Lettings. Loud, long, and legally binding. Viking weddings lasted several days and included a ceremony at a sacred site, often involving Thor's hammer or Freya's blessing. Symbolic gestures, like handing over the bride's sword from her father to the groom. Power transfer. Alert. A feast with boiled sheephead. Mead rivers and dancing that looked like angry stomping. The marriage bed was often publicly acknowledged, sometimes with the community escorting the couple to their chamber to ensure honor, they said. Totally not weird. -9. If love soured, the dramatic divorce. Viking marriages could end with flair. A woman could declare divorce by calling witnesses, reclaiming her dowry, and walking out. A man might leave if he felt dishonored, but he had to return her belongings. Divorced Viking women, often remarried on, were still considered highly valuable. One saga describes a woman who divorced 3 warriors, then chose a peaceful blacksmith and lived happily, much to the confusion of every swordswinger in the region. Viking romance was bold, blunt, and more empowering than you'd expect from a culture with a reputation for chaos. Beneath all the storm-tossed ships and runestones, love among the Norse was about honor balance, and a partner who could handle their own sword and make decent stew. So tonight, let your dreams set sail from a fjord where 2 lovers exchange bone combs under a twilight sky. A saga poet sings of storms and kisses. Mead flows. Somewhere, an old woman mutters, "It'll never last." And a blacksmith carves a heart into a drinking horn. Anyway, love, Viking style, epic, awkward, and kind of perfect. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, the Mughal Empire ruled much of South Asia, blending Persian elegance, Central Asian boldness, and Indian richness into a culture that shimmered like a gold-threaded tapestry. At the empire's heart were towering emperors like Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, builders of wonders like the Taj Mahal, and lovers of music, calligraphy, gardens, and women. Courtship in the Mughal world was extravagant, precise, and unbearably theatrical. Whether you were a prince or a princess, love was less about spontaneity and more about strategy, poetry, and sometimes the proper presentation of mangoes -1. Marriage as empire maintenance. Let's be clear, Mughal marriages especially at court were rarely about love at first sight. They were tools of diplomacy, uniting powerful Rajput or Persian families, acts of social hierarchy, establishing a wife's rank in the royal zenana, carefully calculated by emperors, viziers, and astrologers. Even Akbar the Great, who famously married Rajput princesses to secure alliances, treated each marriage like a political maneuver with heavily ceremonial courtship. But that didn't mean love couldn't blossom, just that it had to squeeze itself in between an elephant parade and a jewel inventory. 2. The Zenana, a kingdom of women and watchful eyes. The Zenana, or royal women's quarters, was a labyrinth of private palaces, baths, gardens, and schools. Home to the emperor's wives, concubines, daughters, and female courtiers. Guarded by eunuchs and powerful women, no man could enter without royal permission. This meant that Mughal women lived behind velvet curtains and carved yali screens, but they were not powerless. Many of them ran businesses, managed land, advised the emperor, or manipulated the court like seasoned chess players. But when it came to love, they had to be subtle, smart, and socially bulletproof. -3. Love letters and perfumed scrolls. Courtship often began through poetry and letters, elegant, florid, and written in Persian, Urdu, or Sanskrit, depending on the sender's background. A typical Mughal love letter included quotes from poets like Rumi or Hafiz, imagery of roses, moons, nightingales, or longing eyes, occasional coded illustrations of lotus drawn in the corner, or a hidden verse tucked inside folds. These were often perfumed, delivered with a pearl necklace, a silk sash dot, or, in one hilarious historical example, a perfectly ripe mango. sent with a note that read, "Your lips taste sweeter than this fruit. Come steal my orchard." Subtle, not exactly effective. Apparently, -4. Swayamvar meets spycraft. The princess's choices royal or noble households. Eligible women were rarely permitted to choose openly, but that didn't stop them from making their preferences known through look exchanges during palace gatherings, secret signals through veil arrangements or bracelet colors, sending a trusted maidservant with a flower tucked in her braid. Only if the lady approved, a princess might arrange to accidentally drop her embroidered shawl in a corridor the prince would pass. Or a suitor might gift her a painting with himself painted faintly in the reflection of a pond. Honestly, Mughal flirting was more spy thriller than rom-com. -5. The Emperor's Eye. Love at first processions. Sometimes a royal man spotted a woman during a procession, garden gathering, or temple visitant, declared his intent instantly. Emperor Jahangir famously fell for Maranisa Nur Jahan, the widow of a Persian courtier, after seeing her at court. He was so taken that he married her, gave her immense power, and let her issue royal orders under her own name and heard of for a woman. But for every Nur Jahan, there were dozens of women paraded before emperors, smiling through peacock feather, fans, and careful posture, hoping their eyes said what their mouths could not. 6. Astrology, the cosmic background checkbee for any engagement. Families consulted royal astrologers. Birth charts, Janam Kundli, auspicious times, Muharat for meetings, letters, and even glances. A bad planetary alignment could delay an engagement for months. A Mars-Venus clash. Forget about it. Courtship paused until Jupiter straightened itself out. You could love someone deeply, but if Saturn disagreed, you'd better prepare to weep into your sandalwood pillow. -7. Gifts and grand gestures in Mughal courtship. Gifting wasn't optional. It was everything a suitor might send. Silk garments stitched with gold, miniature paintings showing to lovers meeting in a moonlit garden, not subtle, caged songbirds, perfume flasks, or mirrors made from burnished silver. But the boldest gesture of all, commissioning a poem, painting, or even a pavilion for your beloved. One nobleman reportedly built a rose garden in the shape of his beloved's footprint. Another sent 365 silk handkerchiefs, embroidered with a verse for each day he waited for her response, which, by the way, she never sent. -8. Court musicians and love ballads music played a central role in Mughal. Love every evening in court was filled with classical ragas played on sitar and tabla, ghazals of yearning and devotion, dancers performing tales of mythical lovers like Layla Majnun or Hiranja. If a nobleman wanted to woo a lady without words, he might hire a poet singer to perform under her window, compose a raga in her name, or request a famous singer to deliver his message during a palace event. Imagine falling for someone because the court musician sang, "She is the jasmine to my monsoon, the mirror to my soul, the tear on my ink," then finding out he meant someone else. Awkward. Weddings, fireworks, florals, and 14-day feasts once accepted. Mughal weddings were enormous, lush, legendary celebrations included elephant parades with canopy-carried brides, fireworks that lit the Yamuna River, performances by poets, acrobats, and dancers, and enough food to feed an entire province. The bride often wore a brocade sharara stitched with sapphires, jewelry weighing more than some livestock, and eyes painted with kohl as dark as midnight regret. The groom, sword at his side, turban tied by his most trusted friend, looking heroic and nervous. The wedding night was ornate, scented, and likely narrated in Persian couplets by a eunuch outside the room. Mughal courtship was a symphony of power, poetry, perfume, and pride. It demanded elegance, patience, and a deep understanding of metaphor. One wrong gift, one mistimed poem, and your romantic hopes were smothered faster than a candle in a monsoon. But when two hearts beat in rhythm beneath carved yali screens, within letters hidden in mango crates, sit was truly sublime. So tonight, let your dreams wander into a rose garden under a crescent moon. Hear the sound of ankle bells, smell saffron rising in the wind. A prince waits beneath a marble arch, holding the scroll he's read 50 times. Somewhere, a young woman smiles, lifting her veil just enough to let him know. She read it to Dot in dynastic China, from the Han to the Tang to the Qing. Romance was never just about hearts. It was about honor, family, and timing. For centuries, love was both celebrated in poetry and disciplined by ritual, a paradox that made every courtship feel like a slow-burning epic with thousands of footnotes. In this delicate world, glances mattered more than gestures. Hairpins signaled fate, and if you passed the imperial exam, you were finally eligible to fall in love. -1 filial piety over flirting love in ancient China was always in the shadow of Confucian values, especially filial piety, zhao, devotion to your parents and ancestors. So, before any young man could think about love, he had to obey his parents' wishes, complete his studies, avoid scandal at all costs. This meant no public courtship, no unsupervised meetings, and definitely no spontaneous serenading under a plum tree. If your parents didn't approve of your love interest, you could either forget them or write 300 poems about how sad you were, -2 poetry exams before proposals in Imperial China. Success in the civil service examination system, Kiju, determined a man's social worth. These exams were brutally hard, based on Confucian classics, full of poetry, philosophy, and metaphors about mountains and moral virtue. Only after passing the exams could a man secure a government job, become a worthy suitor, and afford bride gifts and wedding rituals. So, yes, true love waited often, decades while you memorized 500-year-old verses and debated whether benevolence was more important than righteousness. Romantic, -3, hairpins and handkerchiefs, silent signal since public affection was taboo. Chinese lovers developed a language of subtle gestures, dropping a silk handkerchief, secret invitation, wearing a jade pendant with a certain tassel, availability, offering a hairpin, or receiving one, betrothal or deep emotional promise. A woman might let her sleeve brush a man's fingers while pouring tea scandalous, gaze down a well and recite a verse. If he echoed it, he knew her feelings. Secretly return a scroll with a flower suppressed inside. The quietest things screamed the loudest. 4. Matchmakers and family files. When things got serious, or at least practical, families turned to the matchmaker, Maypo, a professional negotiator of fate and reputation. The process: families exchanged ancestral records, horoscopes, and family histories. A matchmaker visited both households, bearing gifts like tea bricks and sugar fruits. Compatibility was judged not by chemistry, but by birth dates, zodiac signs, and how many cows one family could contribute to the dowry. Sometimes the bride and groom didn't even see each other until the wedding day. That didn't stop them from nervously composing poems about each other's rumored eyebrows. 5. Lantern festivals and hopeful glances. There was one annual chance for hopeful young hearts. It was the Lantern Festival, Yuan Shao, held on the 15th day of the Lunar New Year. Streets lit with glowing lanterns shaped like dragons, phoenixes, and rabbits. Girls were allowed outside, one of the rare moments unmarried women mingled in public here. Couples exchanged poems on lanterns, riddles, if solved, an invitation to conversation, tokens, a sachet, a fan, or a peach blossom. It was like speed dating with candles and Confucian anxiety. -6. The poetry duel. Flirting with metaphors, a common courting method among educated youth, was the poetry duel. One person would quote a famous couplet or riddle. The other had to respond with a clever continuation, same meter, same imagery. A poor answer meant you were either stupid or uninterested. Example: greater than she, the moonlight floods my chamber, yet I am alone. He but dreams of you bloom brighter than jasmine at dawn. If he replied, nice moon, he was out. -7. Secret meetings and bamboo walls. Despite restrictions, love still happened. Many legendary stories tell of whispers through bamboo walls, secret midnight poetry scrolls, lowered in baskets, and maids acting as messengers, ferrying hand fans and sweet rice cakes. One famous tale tells of a young scholar who fell for a merchant's daughter. She signaled her love by arranging chrysanthemums in a water basin. The petals pointed northeast, meaning yes, we know your GPS would never figure that out. -8. Betrothal gifts, and the goose engagement was formal and involved symbolic. Betrothal gifts: pin li, jewelry and silk, rice, wine, and tea, and a live goose, which represented lifelong fidelity. Yes, a goose. The families performed tea ceremonies, gift exchanges, and picked wedding dates based on astronomy, feng shui, and occasionally the sound a toad made near a pond. -9. The wedding veils, red silk, and bowing to the heavens. Chinese weddings were choreographed masterpieces. The bride wore bright red, symbolizing luck and joy. Her face was covered by a red veil. Hong Gai too, lifted only after vows. The couple bowed to one, heaven and earth 2, their ancestors 3, each other. They shared wine in a ritual called Hei Ju, linked by a red thread, symbolizing destiny. The wedding night, often awkward. The bride was expected to be shy, even tearful. the groom, possibly still composing a metaphor about her hair. 10. If love was lost, longing across scrolls. Divorce existed, but was rare and shameful. More common was endless longing. Scholars, exiled to border towns, wrote verses about missing their wives. Widows wrote about lifelong sorrow under moonlit trees. Lovers torn apart by class or clan left behind poems carved into bamboo slips or inked onto silk fans, left to flutter alone. Sometimes lovers reunited years later, older, wiser, sat around, said nothing, letting a willow tree rustle the words they couldn't speak. Ancient Chinese romance was a dance of discipline and desire. It lived in silences, symbols, and scrolls. It was about holding back more than letting go, speaking in riddles instead of declarations, and letting your heart be read between the lines. So tonight, as paper lanterns rise into your dreams, picture a quiet courtyard. A woman gazes through a lattice screen. A man waits beneath the plum tree, holding a scroll scented with sandalwood. Above them, the moon watches round and silent, like all great loves in history. History doesn't just repeat itself, it rhymes. Sometimes that rhyme is very, very sleepy. A soft goodbye, but not the end tonight. Close your eyes, knowing that somewhere a roaming is still reciting love poetry in the afterlife. A Viking is still wondering if he braided his beard right. A Mughal princess is still rearranging her bangles under moonlight. And someone, somewhere, is writing you a letter, just waiting for the right day to send it, because love, in every century, is awkward, and that makes it human, and that makes it timeless, and that makes it beautiful. Good night.